Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. Today we are going to really talk about, I have like top 5 favorite wild plants that I use as both food and for herbal medicine. I'm not sure if necessarily these are both going to fit into the top 5, but one of them certainly would. I'm actually going to talk more about its edible properties, although it does have medicinal properties as well. One of my, I'm going to even say top 3 favorite wild edibles is garlic mustard, a so-called hated invasive weed that the state where I live is trying to eradicate it, and um, just ridiculous. Okay, and we'll get into that. Okay, garlic mustard spreads. It can take over. They say it can, basically smother out, overwhelm our native plants. Well, okay, native to when? That dandelion in your yard, that's not native. It was brought here by Europeans as food and medicine. What exactly is native? Are we talking our ferns? Yeah, those actually could have been here since the dawn of time. I mean, the ferns are like the oldest plants on Earth. Everything else was brought here. Wherever you are is here, right? Basically, from somewhere else at some point in time. So do we call our native plants what was here when the Europeans landed, when the first European settlers came in? Okay, so I guess what are we talking? The Dutch, the Spanish? They got here long before the English. The English were the ones that started writing down a lot of the botany books. And we go by what we consider to be native plants, mainly due to English and French botanists. The English often employed the French because the French were far better at botany than the English. The English we're really big into plant collecting. So in terms of ferns, again, they were really big on that. But as far as taxonomy, the Dutch and the French were light years ahead of the English, and there's a reason for that. We've discussed it. Go back and look at the changes that happened during the Anglican takeover of the universities and the medical profession and such in England. You had some of the most intelligent, learned, greatest scholars in the world teaching in the English universities when they were Catholic. And then they were, beheaded, their heads were cut off, or their properties were stripped from them, their jobs were taken, and really the lower middle class took over. And a lot of them didn't even really speak Latin very well. You look at the difference between John Parkinson and John Gerard. John Parkinson was one of the greatest herbalists of all time. He was the king's personal herbal physician and one of the few Catholics who was not forced to renounce Catholicism or lose his head during the genocidal rule of King Henry VIII, and get into all that. The Catholic countries at that point in time of France had a lot of great botanists that were far more comfortable with Latin and taxonomy. And the Dutch, the Dutch were At that time, I guess Dutch were no longer Catholic in most places. I think they had gone more Lutheran. Is that right? I'd have to check. Could have been Anabaptist by the time the English landed here. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, now I had an ancestor on the Mayflower, and so yeah, I'm leaning more toward Anabaptist. But there was not as much of a social upheaval that really changed the education system. Now, someone who's more about Dutch history may dispute me on that. But anyway, we're just going to say our native plants were when the English landed? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? The Spanish had already brought in plants, and the Dutch had already brought in plants, and the French were bringing in. And why were they bringing in plants? Well, a lot of times it wasn't intentional. Seeds just traveled with people, stuck to their clothes, or in various ways. Many of what we would consider native plants were brought here apparently thousands of years earlier by the Polynesians. I mean, they have found medicine bundles in the desert Southwest that are like, I don't even know how many, like 10,000 years before they thought Asians had even crossed the Bering Strait from, basically what's now Russia to what's now Alaska. And they thought that's how Native Americans first got here, who aren't Native Americans. They're actually so-called First Peoples. We'll go with that. The first peoples to people this place that we call North America were believed to be Asians. Now we're finding more. There may have been Polynesians. And when the Polynesians traveled anywhere from New Zealand to Hawaii to the South America. They were really just incredible navigators. They brought with them specific plants. Do we call those native plants because the Polynesians brought them here? Let's back up another 10,000 years. Plant seeds that travel on winds. Seeds that can travel by birds. Birds that fly from one continent to another, eating seeds and pooping them out over the next continent. Seeds that are so small they can get caught up in thunderstorms and actually rain down on another continent. What is native? Well, the truth is nothing. Everything came from somewhere else or existed in another part of the world. There have been a major climatic changes. Climatic. No, I actually did mean climatic that time. I did a whole series where I was quoting, Michael Crichton, and it was that great Charlton Heston reading of the intro to one of his books about the arrogance of man, how we think the world as we see it right now is how it's supposed to be. 10 million years before, it was completely different, and 10 million years later, it's going to be completely changed and different. So you look at a species like garlic mustard, and you say, oh, it's invasive. Well, it is right this minute. It can crowd out plants that were here maybe 1,000 years before it was, 2,000 years before it was. But if we got rid of all the plants that were brought in the last 1,000 years, we'd have a completely different landscape. And eventually those plants will find their balance. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most tasty and nutritious wild edibles of all. And if people wanted eradicated, it would be far better for folks like you and me, my dear listeners, to go out and harvest it. If it's growing on a public land, ask the Parks Department or the U.S. Forest Department, can I harvest this? It's considered an invasive species. They're probably going to say yes. If it's growing on private land, somebody may actually pay you to go harvest all you can get. I've spoken with people before that have gone out and they'll get 2 or 3 boxes of hefty bags, like the big, 30-gallon trash bags you put leaves in, and they've gone out in an afternoon, filled them all, like 24 30-gallon bags with garlic mustard. Take it home as quickly as possible before it starts to mold in those bags, and blanched it and froze it and had like 5 years worth, and they got paid to do it. So we're totally going to get into that. Out of the medicinal category, we're going to talk actually about one of my favorite culinary herbs. So this is going to be both edible and medicinal. That was brought here by, I'm going to say on this one, mostly the English, because the English really love an herb called salad burnet or garden burnet. It's Sanguisorba minor. It was super popular. I mean, you know, I collect old cookbooks. I've got cookbooks from the colonial era and such, and they used a lot of Burnet. It was one of the herbs. English cooking we think of now. While the English have been notorious for having bad teeth and really boiling their vegetables a lot, that has not always been the case. Before England really got involved in the sugar and slave trade, they didn't have a lot of sugar. I mean, basically, let's go back again. We'll get back to the history of the Anglican Church, and apparently they don't even want to call themselves a church anymore, which I fully support, because they're not. The Anglicans were Catholic. The English, I should say, were Catholic. Anglican actually just means English, by the way. Were Catholic, and the Catholic Church was eradicating slavery throughout Europe. And England was, pretty well on board with that, actually. There were some holdouts, like the Portuguese and, the Dutch were, they didn't want to give up their slaves. But England was, really one of the most learned, great cultures and moral people on the face of the earth. And when they broke away, they fully embraced the slave trade, taking African slaves, putting them in the Caribbean to grow sugar, send it up to their colonies in Boston and such, turn it into molasses, turn that molasses into liquor, and they flooded England with rum and sugar. The average Englishman ate more sugar in a year than the average European in another country ate in their entire lifetimes. And their teeth started rotting, and that has to do with the chemistry of sugar in the body. Not so much that sugar actually decays teeth as we were taught as a kid, but sugar has an effect upon the blood sugar, and to balance the blood sugar, your system will take calcium from your teeth. So sugar is not good for you in large amounts in any way, shape, or form. So they got really into that, and English cooking really took a turn for the worse, becoming much more sugar-based, high tea and puddings and all that. But again, with the bad teeth, more mushy vegetables. And a lot fewer things like salads and fresh vegetables. If you actually back up from that time to, say, the time of, let's just go say the 1300s, 1400s. England was a great gardening culture with some really darn good food. They still looked to France as the superior culinary culture. If you were a nobleman in England, you would probably send your chef to be trained in France. But they had good home cooking as well. And that persisted actually among the lower classes in England in the countryside, really up until the World Wars. If you were to go out somewhere in Yorkshire or somewhere, and you were in a little country village, you would have had some darn good food, actually. I mean, good gravy and beef and, some Yorkshire puddings and everything they had now, but some good vegetables and some good barley soup and, beef and barley or lamb and barley soup. What do they call it? A Scotch broth. I guess, actually, pasties and some actually really good food and some good country wines and such as well. Grapes don't grow very well in England, so they made a lot of gooseberry wine and different things, and wonderful ales. I mean, the traditional ales of England are just superb. I mean, they're some of the finest ales in the world. Before everybody got on to lager. Lager comes from Germany. But anyway, their diet really changed during the World Wars. England was starving, and there was rationing. And just like in America, if you go to the colonial cookbooks, we were using a lot of spices imported and interesting recipes. And after the Great Depression, the World Wars, and Civil War especially, people lived basically at starvation level with rationing, and our cooking became much more meat and potatoes and mushy boiled vegetables than it ever was before, at all. And that's even more true in England. But in colonial times, and pre-colonial times especially, they made great use of salad burnet, and I think this is one you should absolutely grow in the garden, although you may find it wild where it got out of somebody's garden maybe 200-300 years ago. So let's start with garlic mustard. And as I said, This is absolutely one of my favorite wild foods. You know I love garlic. I love all the alliums, right? I love onions. I love leeks. I love shallots. I love scallions, you name it. Wild onions and the ramp is actually my favorite of the wild vegetables. Garlic mustard has a aroma and flavor of garlic. You know I love mustard. I love mustard greens. I love mustard, the condiment. Garlic mustard has the flavor and texture and aroma of mustard, somehow mixed with garlic. So this is like ideal for me, okay? You know, as I said, North Carolina, and I think most states are trying to eradicate it. They find it, they go out and spray it with Roundup. Not the way to go. This is actually a member, well, we'll call it a distant cousin to the mustard family. There's some sort of a debate among the taxologists, those that do genetic testing and come up with new names for plants all the time, whether it's actually a brassica or is in the Aurelia family. The Aurelias are wonderful medicinal herbs. We've talked about many of them before. They're adaptogens, so this is a pretty darn good plant for you to eat. It grows as a dense ground cover, and it actually exudes a chemical from its root that prevents other plants from competing that grow near it. So like we talked about, the walnut tree produces juglans, which gives sort of a bare patch of earth around the tree so it doesn't get crowded out by weeds. This is the reason people don't like garlic mustard. However, I say just grow it in your garden and you won't have to weed your garden. That's me. Hey, I maybe have a little common sense. I don't know. But anyway, it was introduced to the landscape of so-called native plants, of which there are none, really. And it can be disruptive, and it doesn't spread as bad as kudzu. I mean, they lump it in, say, like garlic mustard and kudzu. Well, frankly, the answer to both of those problems is to eat them, because kudzu is a wonderful edible and medicinal plant. And with these two so-called invasives on a really worn-out piece of land, let's say you went down to like Piedmont of South Carolina, where they've been growing nothing but cotton, maybe alternated with tobacco and soybeans more recently, for 300 years, and the soil is hard, compacted, worn out, not nutritious, chemically it smells when it rains. You smell all the chemical fertilizers and pesticides that have been dumped on there for hundreds of years. Really, some of the poorest soil now, it used to be some of the richest soil. You could probably grow on that soil kudzu, because it's a nitrogen fixer. You could grow garlic mustard. You could probably grow some maybe tillage radishes or daikon radish to help break up that hardpan. And while you wouldn't want to necessarily eat anything off that land for the first few years, as the chemicals get bound up in carbon and sink into the soil, basically returning back to their natural state. And you may want to aid that. You may want to put on some various mycelium, some mushrooms to grow in there to help that process. You may want to plant some field peas, maybe some sorghum. Sorghum's what they call it, a C4 plant. It'll take carbon from the atmosphere and fix it in the ground, which is going to bind up a lot of those nasty petrochemicals and such. Okay, so this is where you're getting into permaculture territory. But if you were like living in a post-apocalyptic landscape, like something out of Mad Max, if you had access to garlic mustard, kudzu, a radish species, I would say probably a larger one, or beets. Beets would be nice. You could absolutely remediate that soil, and you could be growing enough food, because see, kudzu actually has protein in its leaves. So you could actually be growing enough food for survival on a half acre. Probably, because kudzu, you could train it, you could trellis it, and the garlic mustard can take over the ground layer. I mean, yeah, an acre at most, for one person, maybe a couple acres for a family, and pretty soon you'd start having some good nutritious soil, and you'd have some good nutritious people as well, where everybody else would be fighting for the last can of Spam. And of course, all that makes wonderful animal feed as well, especially the kudzu. So obviously, I'm quite fond of this plant. I will say it's a bit tough, and it is strong. Okay, you're probably not going to want to eat this raw, but you probably wouldn't want to eat regular mustard raw either. It's peppery, right? But cooked, it's so good. Garlic mustard is really among the most delicious of pot herbs. Prepared just like you would mustard. Just I've told you many times, just tear them up. Don't cut them unless you have a bunch and you need to get through it quickly. Just tear up the leaves, rinse them, get anything nasty off of there. Let them drip dry. Kind of shake them off. Toss them in a pot with some fatback or bacon grease or even olive oil if that's what you want to do. And just let them cook. Leave the lid off because, like all members of well, I'm going to call them brassicas, collards, cabbage, turnips, etc. As they cook, they're going to release sulfur. If you leave the lid on the pot, that sulfur is going to combine with the steam of the water, and it's going to cause sulfuric acid. That's going to cause them to turn a dull, drab, kind of olive green, brown sort of, and become bitter. Never put your lid on a pot when you're cooking greens. I know I say this all the time, but I literally have to say it over and over because people keep asking me, why did you say don't put a lid on a pot when you cook greens? My grandmother always did. Well, okay, in this instance, your grandmother was probably trying to keep them from stinking badly and made a mistake. She didn't get it right. I'm sorry. Leave the lid off the pot. You will have more vitamins, you'll have better flavor, you'll have a brighter green color, you'll have a better texture. So, just toss them in there with the fat, let them just kind of steam down, turn them occasionally, add some salt to taste. When it's time to eat, use vinegar in which you have pickled hot peppers. Ideal food. Ideal food. Okay, I love my greens. That's Southern style. People who are used to cooking with the lid on probably think they're going to need, sugar. No, not if you leave them with the lid off. People put in spices and chicken broth. No. If you live in, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, totally traditional. Parts of Georgia, to put in chicken broth and basically what I'd call Creole seasoning. I've actually got the recipe for Creole seasoning in my Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking, but you can probably look it up online. It's just a mix of garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, cumin, cayenne, oregano. There's usually a little oregano in there. Anything you like. So that's fine. That's delicious. But if you cook them with the lid off, you're not going to need sugar. And if you like the taste of chicken broth with them, go for it. I think that's probably something that was probably more picked up from the Italian tradition where they do like kale or broccoli rabe with some chicken broth and some white beans, like the cannellini beans or whatever. That's really good, actually. A little bit of sausage, beans and greens are really, really good. But that's different. That's not the way I'm cooking my my mustard greens of any type. So. The flowers can also be eaten raw or cooked, so that's a good one to throw into your salad. Garlic mustard is one of the plants that, like I said, people may even pay you to harvest. So learn to use it in different ways. But be sure to, if you do go out and like fill your garbage bags full of it and rush home, get them out of those bags before they start to mold. Just bring up some water to a boil, just quickly blanch them and freeze them. I do not salt the water when I'm blanching greens. Don't put the lid on the pot. Obviously, use a lot of water. You're going to want to get your biggest stock pot because you're going to be plunging greens in there, just letting them boil for a minute, taking them out, draining them in a colander, packing them in a freezer bag, and putting them in the freezer. You could probably can them. You could certainly dehydrate them. That would be a good way to do it. You can make kale chips out of them if you're into that kind of thing. But yeah, I have a freezer, and in the wintertime is most likely when my power is going to go off in the mountains, and it's going to be like 20 below outside. So I find freezing to be a little bit probably the most reliable way of food storage for me, because I can just put everything on the back porch. It's all screened in and everything. Keep it away from the bears and raccoons and such, but they're not really that big of a problem in the wintertime. And let everything stay frozen. So that's kind of my survival strategy. If you live in Florida, you're going to want to figure something else out, most likely, or get a backup generator. But anyway, if you do dehydrate the leaves and flowers, use them in soups. Really nice. Put them in soups, put them in casseroles, use them as a cooked vegetable. If you like the texture of canned spinach, you can just rehydrate it and go with that. It's not really my thing, but I don't mind it that much either. In a survival situation, I'd certainly make a cream of base and do a casserole or like a spanakopita. I mean, that would be so good with a garlicky flavor. But anyway, as I said, the states are trying to eradicate it. It may be illegal to grow purposefully in your garden. So if you find a little spot in your yard where some may just mysteriously have crept in, and who knows how it got there, it doesn't look like I planted it intentionally. That may be a good option. I'm just saying. I'm not recommending it, but I got a lot of stuff growing in my yard. I haven't even identified it all yet. But anyway, garlic mustard comes up in the early spring, and so I'll either combine it with some parsley because that overwinters. I can keep it going in the windows, really, in the mountains. But if you have a sunny spot and maybe a little sheltered from the wind, it'll be okay, just outside. Let's see, do I have a good recipe in the book? Yes, I do. Oh, and you're going to love this. Garlic mustard pasta. A half cup per serving of finely chopped garlic mustard leaves, a half cup per serving of garlic mustard stems. That'll work, okay? And that may be actually a little too much. You might want to cut back on those stems. I'd use just as many stems as come with the leaves for one serving. But anyway, fourth cup per serving fresh parsley or eighth cup of dried. Fourth cup per serving of grated Parm or other good hard cheese. Fourth cup of dry white wine. A half teaspoon of lemon zest. You may find that a little too much lemon zest. Cut it back if you don't like it. Remember, that's just like the yellow. Don't get the white pith. And so that's a large amount of lemon zest to use with this dish. So that's to my taste. I like it. I love the combination of lemon zest with parsley. And salt and pepper to taste, obviously. Olive oil to taste. Crushed red pepper to taste. And if you had a few capers or some chopped olives, nice addition. Not absolutely necessary. And pasta as much as you like. And I love pasta. That's probably why I made the per serving measurements a little high on this dish. This was my serving size of pasta, and the average person's serving size of pasta is very different. I often say the only reason I never ate at one of those all-you-can-eat pasta restaurants is because I'm not sure how much pasta I actually could eat in one sitting, and if I found out, it may be fatal. I mean, I can consume some pasta. Mass quantities, as the Coneheads used to say. You remember that the original Coneheads on Saturday Night Live in the 70s? They loved their boiled chicken, eggs, and beer, right? And they call them chicken embryos and beer, and they consume mass quantities. And they just like pour a whole six-pack down their throat at one shot, But anyway. All right, so we're going to cook the stems because they're going to take longer than the grains. So saute the garlic mustard stems in olive oil with salt and pepper. And once they're tender, and only then, add the leaves and parsley and just cook them down. Cook your pasta to just done. I like it, I'm going to say just a little past al dente. I mean, I know, I have Italian friends that go crazy about how the pasta has to almost be crunchy. I like it to have a little bit of chew, but not be raw. I don't like mushy pasta either. I like it just right to my taste, so make it to your taste. Anyway, drain the pasta, add the olive oil and the veggies and lemon zest and salt and pepper and a little bit of wine and just kind of cook it a little bit. Just bring those flavors into the pasta. Top with the cheese, dish it, plate it up. It's fantastic. It's just a wonderful pasta dish. You can actually do just about anything with this. Any wild grain. If you like more mild wild grains, use those. You can use it with just parsley. You can use it with just basil. I mean, you could use it literally with just about anything you like. Go for it. And now, the only caveat here, you may notice I left garlic out. I put garlic in everything. Because this is garlic mustard, I left the garlic out. If I was doing a wild green or spinach from the garden, something more mild, I definitely throw in some chopped garlic. So you're going to love this. It's one of the cheapest dishes you can make. It's going to become a real standard in your house in spring and summer if you get into it. It's just pasta and herbs and greens and a little cheese, a little white wine. Just remember, add the cheese at the end. You don't want to add the cheese and the wine at the same time, or the cheese is going to stick to the pot and everything's going to get all stringy and nasty. Grate the cheese over it at the end. That's also, if I was going to add some olives or capers, I'd put them on at the end so that they don't really cook into the sauce, which is, more the flavor of the olive oil and the wine and all that. But, that's up to you. You could throw some tomatoes in there if you like. I wouldn't with garlic mustard, but hey, whatever you like. It's always the point of my cookbooks. I always say I'm not telling you how to cook like I do. I'm telling you how to cook so you can cook like you like it. Before we get too far into this show, and I totally lose track as I talk about all the wonderful dishes we can make from wild edibles and all the wonderful medicinal uses. A couple months ago, I began telling you about a new product I've begun using. It's called Magic Mind. Now, we mentioned adaptogens recently. This has some great adaptogenic herbs in it, like ashwagandha, but also some of the mushrooms, like lion's mane, which are so good for the brain, for immunity. It's got a lot of great herbs in it for the immune system. I really like it. It's sort of a green tea, a matcha-based little herbal shot that I take in the mornings, and I think it helps with the immune system. I know it helps me think a little more clearly. It's good for memory. It's good for a lot of things, in my opinion, And you can go to their site and check out the research on the various aspects of what's in it and what it does. But, I really like it, and it's also pleasant to drink. I go in the mornings and I'll put the coffee on, and I grab my little shot of Magic Mind, and that's a really nice alternative to, sweet, sugary citrus juices that I would have had as a kid. I don't think I've had a glass of orange juice in 20 years, but so, I really do appreciate the flavor of this in the mornings. And like I said, I like the product, and the people who make Magic Mind are giving my listeners a special discount. Check out the code in the show notes, or just type in Judson Carroll Trial. It's simple as that. You go to magicmind.com/Judson Carroll Trial, or if you go to their site and it says enter a promo code, type in JUDSONCARROLLTRIAL, and I guess it needs to be in all caps. Just type that in, and they're going to give you a really good deal on it. Basically, they're going to give you a free sample, so y'all can check it out. I have to carry around a lot of information in my head. I could not write my books or do my podcasts if I did not have a lot of information just right at my fingertips. All the research, hundreds of books, years spent doing this, decades spent learning about herbal medicine and wild edible plants and using these things, and just I've had to learn Latin. I've had to go back and read books in ancient Greek and all kinds of stuff, the Sumerian tablets and the Ebers papers, and I know it can be a little bit overwhelming to people. People said talking to me about herbs and such, it's like drinking from a fire hose. I give a lot of information. But the bottom line is I can give all that information because all that information is stored in my brain. And so a supplement like Magic Mind that helps with memory and cognition and just helps you be sharp and clear and at your best is really very valuable to me. And I think if you check it out, do your own research as always. I think you may find it useful too. So I like the product, and I think you will. So do check out that discount code. It is a great savings. And give me your feedback. Let me know what you think about it if you give it a try. So anyway, y'all, Judson Carroll Trial is the promo code. And again, that's Magic Mind. But now we'll get into the medicinal herb, which is also a culinary herb. It is Sanguisorba minor, known as Burnet, garden burnet, salad burnet, or small burnet. And this is an herb that's very little used in our time. Unless you go to a really specialty herb and spice store, culinary herb and spice, the chances of you seeing burnet for sale are slim to none. This was once one of those popular cultivated foods and medicines in early America, and especially in England, but I know it was popular throughout most of Europe. And it's really pleasant, and it's not overly assertive. It's a pretty little plant. I think it would be at home in any flower or vegetable garden. It's been used as far back as ancient Greece. But I'm going to give you this caveat. There are two types of Burnet. There's what we call Sanguisorba minor and Sanguisorba major. Sanguisorba minor is the one we use more as a culinary herb. It's called garden Burnet or salad Burnet, or minor, small Burnet, right? Major is large Burnet or great Burnet, often called larger Burnet. Not as good as a culinary herb or an edible. Pretty much about the same medicinally. So whereas I think Dioscorides was writing about Sanguisorba major, I'm going to give you his description anyway of how to use it, but then we'll get into the smaller garden Burnet as we get to the English tradition. He says that, and the reason I think it's large is because he said it is a large shrub with long branches. That's not the case with salad Burnet. See, he said the seed, to one who tastes it, has a sweet scent and is sharp. It grows in sandy, hilly countries. The roots are 2 or 3 feet long, so yeah, it's got to be the greater. They're strong and sinewy. When cut close to the ground, they send out a fluid similar to gum. The root cut and smeared on heals cut apart sinews and wounds, and a decoction if taken in drink is good for disorders of strength. So the greater is a useful herb, but less edible. But now we're going to get to what Gerard said about the small or garden Burnet, and he said you could use the greater interchangeably medicinally. So he says Burnet is a singular good herb for wounds. It stanches or stops the bleeding, and therefore it was named Sanguisorba. It, I guess, kind of absorbs blood, blots it up, right? As well as inwardly taken as outwardly applied, as well being inwardly taken as outward applied. So he believed it was a good herb to stop bleeding, whether internal or external. Either the juice is given or the decoction of the dry leaves of the herb being bruised is outwardly applied or else put among other external medicines. It stayeth the lask in bloody flux. It is also most effectual to stop the monthly course. Right. That means it helps with excessive menstrual bleeding or even bloody diarrhea. So good herb to have on hand for that purpose, to say the least. The lesser Burnet or salad Burnet is pleasant to be eaten in salads. And it is thought to make the heart merry and glad. Also being put into wine, it yieldeth a certain grace in the drinking. Now you can see why this was such a popular herb. Like borage. Borage is also said, when infused in wine, to make the heart more merry and even to give courage. A lot of these herbs were grown both to be used in salad, tossed into soups and stews or whatever, and they were infused in wine. And there's a great book, Stephen Herod Buhner's Sacred and Healing Herbal Beers. He always had ridiculous titles, but excellent books. It talks a lot about those traditions of steeping certain herbs in wine. And, yeah, we've talked about so many of these, from mugwort to borage to, oh boy, so many, wormwood. Anyway, lots of them. So he says, the decoction of pimpernel drunken cureth the bloody flux, the splitting of blood, and all other fluxes of blood and in man or a woman. So I think he was saying it was also called pimpernel. The herb and seed made into powder and drunk with wine or water, wherein iron hath been quenched, doth the like. That was also an old tradition in Europe. They take a hot iron from the fire and plunge it into the drink to make it boil, and that would make the herbs and spices more aromatic, and that would give you a hot drink on a cold day. So real old tradition there that was much more common than we would see now. We might see that in a medieval times restaurant or something, but probably not even there, maybe at a Renaissance fair. The leaves of pimpernel are good to heal wounds and are received in drinks that are made for inward wounds. The leaves of burnet, steeped in wine and drunken, comfort the heart, and make it merry, and are good against the trembling and shaking thereof. So what would we say about that? It probably has some good uses against anxiety. So does borage and several herbs. Ashwagandha, we can go down that list. But, if it's tasty in wine, it might be a good thing for people to look into. About 100 years later, Culpeper said it was a most precious herb and just but little inferior to betony. In the continual use of it preserves the body in health and the spirits in vigor. For if the sun be the preserver of life under God, his herbs are the best in the world to do it by. I agree entirely. Culpeper was a really interesting character, extremely bigoted, anti-Catholic, but occasionally we agree and on such subjects as the grace of God in giving us the healthful herbs and nutritious foods. They are counted to be both of one property, but the smaller is the most effectual because it is quicker and more aromatic, so the larger and the smaller. It is a friend of the heart and the liver and the other principal parts of man's body. 2 or 3 of the stalks with leaves put into a cup of wine, especially claret, are known to quicken the spirits, refresh and cheer the heart, and drive away melancholy. It is a special help to defend the heart from noisome vapors. So that would actually be more like gas pains that cause chest pains, as best as I understand, and from infection and pestilence. Could even be angina, though, because apparently those feel quite similar. And from infection of the pestilence, the juice thereof being taken in drink, and the party laid to sweat immediately. So it must have some febrifuge properties. You'd wrap up in a blanket, get in front of the fire, and help you sweat out the fever. They also have a drying and astringent quality, whereby they are available in all manner of fluxes of blood and humors to staunch bleeding inward and outward, lasks, scourgings, the bloody flux, women's too abundant courses, the whites, and choleric belching and casting of the stomach, so also good to settle a stomach. It is a singular good herb for all sorts of wounds, both of the head and body, either inward or outward, for all old ulcers, for running cankers and moist sores, to be used either by the juice or the ointment to be used either by the juice or decoction of the herb, or by the powder of the herb or root, or the water distilled of the herb, or the ointment itself, with other things be kept. So in other words, the entire plant was useful. The seed is no less effectual, both to stop fluxes and to dry up moist sores, being taken in powder inwardly in wine or steeped in water. That is, when a hot gads of steel have been quenched in it. So in that case, they were actually saying that you could probably just boil it in water, actually. That was really just a quick way of boiling something. Or the powder of the seed be mixed in the ointments. And, if you had done it the old way of taking that hot iron rod and putting in there, you might get a little iron as well. So if you were bleeding and you had anemia, it might be actually a fairly useful combination. And Miss Grieve, 1930s England, says the lesser or salad Burnet is not unlike the great Burnet, but is smaller and more slender, and was known by old writers as Pimpinella. So there we go. We solved that little mystery. She said that the leaves bruised smelled like cucumber and was often combined with borage added to salads and cups, meaning wine. So I would probably, so borage, good for anxiety, good for depression. They say it gives courage. I don't know. Good for grief. It seems that sanguisorba, that the Burnet has some similar properties. We have other herbs, some like in the basils. I mean, holy basil comes to mind. If this is something that interests you, do some more research, and you might come up with some very nice herbed wines, or some nice things like this to throw into a salad that could actually be of some help. And one that, well, we discussed mugwort before, and mugwort, of course, is in the Artemisia family. It's very bitter, not as bitter as wormwood. It's good for helping with grief, actually. Probably would want to put that in a different concoction, but who knows? You could make your own vermouth. This would be a lot of the herbs that would have been used in early vermouth. motherwort. Motherwort, very good for sort of the premenstrual type issues. Never to be taken during pregnancy, but some of the more emotional aspects of that. You may find a lot of these herbs, lemon balm, that you may use as teas or put in wines, which is far more traditional. And I'm sure Susan Weed and Rosemary Gladstar and all of them have written on this subject. So if you need to look for resources, I'd probably start there. But this was, much used and much known by older herbalists going back thousands of years. I mean, St. Hildegard von Bingen was talking about a vermouth, a wormwood wine, for much the same reasons back in 1080. I mean, this has been around for a long time. So she goes on and talks about the taxonomy of the name, which is now completely pretty much outdated, but it was listed in English medicine as early as 1551 by Turner. He said, this is interesting, it's very old English. It has 2 little leaves likened to the wings of birds. And, okay, let's see if I can actually get it a little better. This is very old English, the kind, they would make fun of like in a Monty Python sketch or something. But it has 2 little leaves likened to the wings of birdies, standing out as the bird setteth her wings out when she intendeth to fly. Ye Dutchmen call it her Goddy's birdlin, that is God's little birdie, because the color that it hath at the top with 2 P's. Anyway, flowers in June and July usually. Salad Burnet, she said, grew very commonly, especially in the chalky areas like the White Cliffs of Dover and such. She said in the herb gardens of older days, salad burnet always had its place. Bacon recommended it to be set in alleys together with wild thyme and water mint to perfume the air most delightfully, being trodden on and crushed. And as you may remember, Sir Francis Bacon is thought by some to have been the same person as William Shakespeare. A lot of cultural importance to Burnet in this era of England, which is, a really nice era of England when my people still ruled the country. Yes, my ancestors were the House of Wessex, King Richard Lionheart, Arrowith, St. Edward the Confessor. Anyway, you may understand my biases now, especially having an Irish surname, coming from the Catholic English and Catholic kings of Ireland, and the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. Not real big on the current monarchy of England, starting with King Henry VIII when he broke tradition. So, we don't need to get in cultivation, but it does need stratification. So you want to sow the seeds in autumn, as she says, let them overwinter, and they'll come up in the spring. It just needs that freezing and thawing action. You can replicate that using your freezer and refrigerator if you need to. If you didn't get them in the ground in fall, you could actually freeze them for a couple of weeks and put them in the fridge, pop them back in the freezer, go back and forth, and they'll stratify. So she says the whole herb was useful medicinally. Usually gathered in July and dried. The older herbalists held this plant in greater repute than it enjoys at the present day. Pliny recommended a decoction of the plant beaten up with honey for diverse complaints. Duodens, I cannot pronounce that name, I never have it, Dodoens, Dodones, I don't know. Recommended as a healer of wounds, he said, made into a powder and drank with wine, wherein iron hath been often quenched. There we go again. And so doth the herb alone, being but only holden in a man's hands, have some written. So it was one of those herbs he said was so powerful in stopping and bleeding, just holding it in your hand would help. Probably doesn't. That's just, maybe, who knows? Maybe if your hands were really sweaty, you could absorb something. But I always just kind of say, yeah, probably not. The leaves steeped in wine and drunken doth comfort and rejoice the heart, and are good against the trembling and shaking of the same. See, we're starting to see a lot of these same things in different cultures and times. She mentions Parkinson grew it, and it was introduced in America from the mother country, as she calls it. It gives grace to the drinkage. So again, steeped in wine was good. He's actually in tankards, so he apparently was used in both wine and beer. And a special help in defending the heart from noisome vapors, good in infections from the plague and pestilence, etc., etc. It is a capital wound herb. All right, let's get up. She says it's still regarded to as a styptic. It means, help stop bleeding. Infusion of the whole herb being employed as an astringent, so a tea from the herb essentially. And it promotes perspiration. John Kehoe in the Irish tradition says decoction of the herb is very good against dysentery, spitting, or pissing of blood. And again, that is proper English of his time. Late 1700s, early 1800s. That was the common usage of the term and was later considered vulgar because it comes from a French word and was not considered to be English enough, and therefore you may think of it as a bad word. But Shakespeare used it. Anyway, good for menstrual disorders and all flows of blood. The green leaves are crushed and applied to wounds. They prevent abscesses and inflammations. If steeped in wine, they cheer the heart and exhilarate the spirits, for in short, it is an excellent cordial herb. We have, they're far more common, say before 1970s or so, cordials. Cordials are usually herbal infused wines or spirits that are sweetened, and would comes from cordial, which relates to Latin cordis for heart. They were thought to help with chest pains or sadness or anything anxiety, and you have a classification called cordial herbs. In our time, you usually just see like cherry cordial candies, which are artificially made, but at one time they were made with cherry brandy and absolutely delicious. If you can get some real honest to goodness like German cherry cordials made with kirsch, they're incredible. My mouth started watering just the thought of it. They're incredible cherry brandy. Oh my gosh, this is going to be the best thing you've put in your mouth. And I think if I remember correctly, see, when I was a kid in the store, my family had a sort of an imported gourmet grocery store. We had real cordial chocolates. And I think a law was passed against some, because some kid might get a half teaspoon of alcohol, kind of ridiculous. But yeah, when I was a kid, I loved those cordials. That was like the biggest treat to get that nice dark chocolate with that cherry brandy in it, or some or an orange liqueur was one that was often filled with, or creme de menthe. And it wasn't enough alcohol to do anything, but my gosh, that flavor, I'll never forget it. Never. Well, if I ever learn to become a chocolatier, that's going to be like one of the first things I make. And my favorite, I remember this wasn't even what they call cordial, but it was actually cherries steeped in cherry brandy and then covered in dark chocolate. And they were amazing. Like you might have chocolate covered cherries at Christmas time. Let me tell you, the real thing is mind blowing. If I had a time machine, I would go back and just stock up on those. Wow. I'm not kidding you. It was that good. Better than anything. I love a good handmade truffles where they infuse, different liqueurs. Really fantastic. That's about the only thing that comes close. Yeah, we need to bring back that tradition big time. If not in commerce, in our own families at Christmas time, a real fruit cake, real cherry cordials. Your family's you're gonna have some visitors for Christmas if you do that. Trust me. But let's get up to plants for future modern times. Medicinal use of salad burnet. Both the leaves and roots are astringent, diaphoretic, and styptic. However, it says the root is most active. The plant is an effective wound herb, quickly staunching any bleeding. The infusion is used in the treatment of gout and rheumatism. The leaves can be used fresh or harvested in July, and the plant dried before it flowers, it says. The root is harvested in the autumn and dried. An infusion of the leaves is used as a soothing treatment for sunburn or skin troubles such as eczema. Edible parts include the young leaves and shoots, raw or cooked. They are best used before the plant comes into flower. Eaten in salads or used as a garnish or added to soups. Cooling drinks in claret cups. Young seedlings are boiled and eaten. It's a bit fiddly to harvest, and the leaves sometimes become bitter in hot, dry summers. Yeah, you want to pick this one early. But they are usually fairly mild tasting in winter, so you can get a second crop. I have actually tried that. I can't believe I didn't think about that. But yeah, you can harvest in spring and you can harvest it again in early winter. So it said some people detect a cucumber flavor in them. In the acidic soil of our Cornish trial grounds, the leaves have a distinctly bitter flavor. So sweeter when grown in a chalky soil and much more mild. Interesting. Okay. The leaves contain about 5.6% protein, believe it or not. 1.2% fat, 11% carbohydrate, 1.7 ash, and an herb tea is made from the dried leaves. Botany in a Day says the tea of the root is highly astringent, used for diarrhea, hemorrhaging, and varicose veins. So you could even use it as a wash to astringe the tissue of varicose veins. Presumably probably good for hemorrhoids and such as well, if that be the case, because that's hemorrhoids are essentially varicose veins. Okay. So if you think about them in that way, it becomes a lot easier to treat them with herbs. Anything astringent, you take a bath with it, you're probably going to feel a little bit better. Anyway, y'all, that's going to wrap it up here. Two of my favorites, honestly. Burnet I love it with eggs. It's one of my favorite herbs to go with eggs. I'm going to have to try some of these infused wine recipes, especially with borage and such. But yeah, I'm glad to know I can get a second crop out of it. Now, as far as garlic mustard, I'm not going to tell you to grow it, but you need to find a source for it. If you're worried about food insecurity, this is one that's like, you know how they say mint spread? Garlic mustard essentially spreads and kills other plants around it. So I'm telling you, you could put it in like the worst spot and it's probably going to do just fine. And just, forget how it got there and don't tell anybody. But if you find a good supply of it, I am serious. I would love to have some seeds. I'm just going to keep them in my collection. Keep them in the freezer in my seed collection as far as anybody knows. I have never been able to find it in seed and harvest it at the right time of year. If you have access to garlic mustard, I would love to have some seeds. So anyway, y'all, have a great week. I'll talk to you next time. Go just enjoy all this wonderful bounty that God gave us, this healthy, nutritious, delicious, wonderful foods that are also medicinal. It's just so fun to learn about this stuff and talk about it. We're nearing 200 episodes. So I think after 4 years of doing this podcast, just how much fun I have learning about such things and talking about them and using them medicinally, and especially cooking with them, because I do love to cook. I enjoy cooking more than I enjoy eating, and you can tell how much I enjoy eating. So anyway, y'all, have a good one. I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.